Okay, this is the second video for topic 3.6, which deals with economic development and globalization. So in this video, we're going to talk about the post-industrial landscape, what the economic landscape looks like in core countries today, the role of governments in trying to promote job creation in core countries, and the effect that globalization contributed to the 2008 housing market crash and recession. So we left off with this slide. Let me clear these notifications out. What we talked about at the conclusion of the last video was this idea of an international division of labor, which was created, in which core countries try and outsource or offshore production to semi-periphery and periphery countries. The role of transnational corporations in exploiting countries in semi-periphery and periphery areas for cheap jobs and resource production. And as core countries have seen a loss of these blue-collar, tertiary, secondary sector jobs, as these types of secondary sector jobs have been outsourced or offshored to periphery and semi-periphery countries. One of the negative side effects has been this creation of what are known as brownfields. A good example of a brownfield looks like this. Brownfield would be like a blighted, meaning like run down, poorly developed area, mainly on the outskirts of cities. If you were to travel into Janesville, Beloit, Rockford, parts of Milwaukee, many of those cities were at one time big manufacturing powerhouses, meaning that they produced a lot of coal or steel or iron or cars, consumer goods. And then as those jobs became too expensive, those jobs were offshored or outsourced to other countries. And so these empty, abandoned factories have emerged within many parts of core countries. This is an example of one over here on the left. This shows an example of a brownfield site that's been renovated to include like a new park, some new areas to accommodate consumers. So in some places, brownfields have been renovated due to cheap property as a positive, but in some areas, they remain run down. And obviously, if you were looking to buy a home or to start a business, you're not going to start one around this area in the picture shown on the left. And so brownfields have had a negative effect overall on development in core countries. Some positive effects have been the creation of what are known as technopoles. These are very similar to growth poles. We talked about this earlier in Unit 3, in which technopoles are areas of a country that attract high-tech manufacturing jobs, which could include like artificial intelligence. A good example of this would be Silicon Valley in Northern California, the Tech Triangle, which has a lot of tech jobs in Canada, around a couple of universities in Southern Ontario, the Route 128 corridor in Boston, which includes Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Many companies concentrate or agglomerate around that area for the economic side effects. They have access to high-skilled labor. A lot of these college graduates that are just getting out of college that are highly skilled, and they can attract with good wages. The Research Triangle is another one, which is located in North Carolina around like Duke and North Carolina University. Another side effect that's negative is what is known as a backwash effect. A backwash effect would be the effect of a loss of jobs or the growth of a city on these rural interior regions. So as more and more people, high school graduates, college graduates, concentrate in bigger cities where the high level universities are located, these rural interior regions lose the most skilled and talented workers to the urban areas in these growth poles. So it shows this lack of a uniform landscape in core countries, as big cities and growth poles attract the best skilled workers, and the rural interior lands of a country usually are less developed, and it's shown in levels of unemployment, literacy rates, and national income. So what the government has done in many core countries, including ours, to try and encourage growth not only in cities but in rural areas, has been these four topics. They've attempted what are known as tax breaks, which usually target like a specific good or service. For example, a government may provide tax breaks for a company that comes in and hires at least 50 workers, or a company that comes in and produces green types of energy or solar powered energy. The governments will usually offer low interest loans, meaning it's very cheaper. It's cheaper for a company to get a loan from the government to start up a business, to build a factory, to make an improvement on an existing business. They might forgive debt if a company owes money to the government. They might offer cheap property at cheap rates, low interest rates. They might subsidize or give money to certain industries or businesses, or they might make changes to government regulations. A government regulation would be a minimum wage law would be a government regulation, how many employees a firm can hire, healthcare regulations, and environmental regulations. So by lowering those regulations, it makes it cheaper for a company to do business there, and therefore attracts more companies and leads to more economic growth and more job growth. Some of the side effects, though, in a negative way, could be possible low minimum wage laws, low rates of union memberships, and possible negative effects on the environment as you loosen these regulations up. A good example of economic development and governments trying to incentivize economic development would be what are known as TIF districts. A TIF district stands for tax increment financing. In a nutshell, a TIF district is an area of a city that in which property taxes are paid, and some of the property taxes are put into a bank. The property taxes, part of it goes to any new company or business that wants to make renovations or start a business within that district, and they get money provided through this TIF district. Woodstock is a city that uses TIF districts along with many others. If you go to the site here, this is through Woodstock, and it shows the TIF boundaries of the TIF districts in the city of Woodstock. So that's just an example of a government here at the municipal level trying to incentivize or promote economic growth. Some of the negative effects of globalization could be that when there's an economic downturn in one country, usually it leads to an economic downturn in many countries. A good example of this would be the 2008 housing market crash and the stock market crash of 2008. As the United States economy rapidly slowed down in 2007, 2008, many people stopped buying homes. Banks started to crash for a variety of reasons that I can get into in class. But since Americans buy a lot of goods and services from other countries, think of the chain reaction here. As Americans cut back on their spending because they're losing jobs or they're losing wealth or income, this has a negative effect on countries in other parts of the world that sell Americans their goods and services. So a good example of this would be if there was a German company that provided cars and housing products to American consumers. Well, all of a sudden, with the housing market crash, American consumers are going to buy less of German products, which means that the German company is producing less goods and services and is selling less goods and services, and therefore they have to lay workers off. And now those German workers stop buying as many foreign-made products from, say, Denmark or Spain or Italy. And you could see this chain reaction here that because trade is involved worldwide, as one country collapses or has economic issues, this affects other countries as well. And this is evident in the 2008 recession. The United States had a big economic downturn that lasted several years. It not only affected the United States, but hit European markets and Asian markets extremely hard as well. A good example of this, you could see that right here, before the 2008 housing market crash, the United States was producing about 3% more goods and services. And then with the housing market crash, it was actually producing far less, about 4% less goods and services than it was the year before. And this lasted for quite some time. The blue figures are for the European Union. The red figures are for the United States. So you can see there's a connection here that as the United States does well, the European Union does well. And then as the United States begins to take a hit, this has an adverse or negative effect on the European Union.